Real Loonies.
All right, well, welcome and thank you guys all for coming out tonight. We're thrilled to be hosting Gregory Bastianelli tonight for the launch of his new book, Loonies. Greg is a New Hampshire native. He studied writing at University of New Hampshire and was a reporter for a small daily paper. He's also been a great supporter of the store and other local authors, which we really appreciate. Loonies is the story of a quiet New Hampshire town and a mysterious locked steamer trunk found in an attic, the contents of which lead the main character on an investigation that is way too scary for me to even recount. I'm going to let Greg tell you about it. Please join me in welcoming Gregory Bastianelli to Water Street Bookstore.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming. I actually got the idea for this book a long time ago. People who live in this area might know this, but back in the 80s in Somersworth, New Hampshire, there was actually a family who did discover a mysterious trunk in their home. Someone had given it to them it was 25 years before and asked them to store it, and they forgot about it. And when they finally remembered that this was in there, it was in their basement, not the attic like in this book, but they actually opened it up, and it was quite a discovery, a shocking discovery, the contents of which is the same contents I used in this story. But ever since that case, and it's still, to this day, it's still an unsolved case. And it dated back to the trunk was discovered in the 80s. What they found dated back to the 1950s. And it's actually a fascinating unsolved crime story. So I had always thought someday that I would like to write my version of what they found in the trunk and what happened. And it just took a long time, just kind of thinking about it. And finally it all resulted in this. And, we don't know the real story, so this will have to do. But, I like my first book, Joker's Club, was kind of a horror mystery hybrid. This book is more of just a straight mystery, but I kind of like to think of it as like a dark mystery, but not so much like your typical mystery book. It's more I think of it as more a mysterious book because I have multiple mysteries throughout it. It's not just a who done it. It's more like a who, what, when, where, why, and how done it. And the main character is a reporter, and reporters, that's their, when they go after a story, that's what they look for, the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And so the main character, Brian Keyes, he moves from the Boston area where he worked as a crime reporter for a big city newspaper, and he moves with his wife to the small town in New Hampshire because his wife is expecting a baby and she wants a quieter lifestyle for them. So he moves to take over a little community weekly. We're one of those weekly newspapers in a small town where not a lot happens. And he's kind of stuck in this humdrum life until they open the trunk. So I'm going to read two selections from this book. I'm going to start with the very first chapter, and then I'll go on to something a little further in. So the first chapter is called The Trunk in the Attic. Smoky Hollow had the appearance of a quiet and quaint New England town until the day the trunk in the attic was opened. Brian Keyes left his downtown newspaper office at the end of the day to stroll over to the police station when he got the call from his wife. Darcy had been poking around in the attic of the house they had just settled into when she discovered an old steamer trunk. He didn't like the idea of her going up the drop-down ladder that led to the attic space. She was 4 months pregnant, and the thought of her missing a step and falling backwards onto the floor unnerved him. She was curious, she told him, and excited about exploring their new home. When he asked what was in the trunk, she informed him it was locked. There was a small keyhole, and she had been thinking about jamming a screwdriver in it to try to open the trunk. He told her not to wait until he got home. Those old steamer trunks were valuable to antique dealers if they were in good shape. He didn't want her damaging it trying to open it. She wasn't happy about waiting, but she ended up being glad she did. If she had opened it by herself, she might have gone insane. Brian liked the location of his newspaper office on the corner of Main Street and Hemlock Ave, not only because it looked out on the business district of Smoky Hollow, but also because it was across the street from Cully's Pub, where he liked to imbibe in a cold draft beer after his day was done, and it was diagonally across from the police station where he was headed now. Not that the police station was a hotbed of activity, not in Smoky Hollow. at least not before the trunk was opened. The New Hampshire town lay in a valley. Often on early summer mornings, mist would settle there, bathing the town in a smoky haze, giving the community of about 7,000 the origin of its name. Smoky Hollow had a minimal staff at its police station. The chief, Noah Treese, was new and young, late 20s, about the same age as Brian. There were only 2 other full-time officers. One worked day shift and one worked night shift. Chief Treese floated between the 2 shifts, but always said he was never really off duty. There were several part-time officers, a couple of part-time administrative people, and a dispatcher, though most of the emergency calls went through the county office. Brian walked through the front door of the station, no metal detector or security buzzer to worry about. This was Smoky Hollow, not the precinct stations in Boston where just a few short months ago Brian Keyes was working the crime beat for one of the city papers. Now that was a time when walking into a police station was like opening Pandora's box, with any type of depraved crime of passion, greed, or lust just waiting for him at the sergeant's desk. He still remembered the flutter in his chest every time he approached a grizzled police veteran for the nightly report. It was the same flutter in his chest when he fell in love with Darcy. Walking into the Smoky Hollow police station spawned no flutter in Brian Keyes' heart. Nothing happened in this town. This wasn't Boston or any of its bustling burbs. This was a town whose highlight was the annual Dump Festival. The only major crime in the past several decades was the unsolved disappearance of 4-year-old Timmy Birch, 24 years ago, a case that the outgoing police chief had pledged to solve before retirement. That never happened. Chief Noah Treese had a glass office and always seemed happy to see Brian whenever he walked into the station, which Brian could never figure out because neither of them had any information to share to help their stagnant careers. Brian sometimes thought Noah was just glad to see a friendly face to talk to that would help break up the mundane pace of his job. Brian greeted Wanda, the dispatcher / receptionist / secretary / not sure what other function she had, and she half-heartedly nodded as if disturbed he was interrupting her boredom. Noah flung open his door and waved him in. Brian settled in on one of the hard wooden chairs across from the chief's desk. He looked at Noah's smile, such a handsome, even pretty face on a man young enough to only be a patrolman in Boston, but here he was at the top spot in this town's police department, a job that didn't apparently require a lot of experience. Brian liked Noah, and he wasn't sure what it was about the young chief that drew him. Maybe it was the fact they both had jobs that could be exciting in a different setting than Smoky Hollow, but their career paths had unceremoniously dumped them into their current positions, and they were stuck with their lot in life. The only major difference Brian saw was that Noah seemed content, happy overseeing a community where the major scofflaws were people breaking pooper-scooper laws or the occasional peeping Tom. Give me something, Brian wanted to shout. Tell me something happened that would make my heart flutter. Make me be in love with my job again. Would that be so hard? How are you, Brian? The smiling face said. How's your day going? About the same as most days. How is Darcy? Good, thanks. Not long after Brian had met him, Noah had stopped by their house to welcome them to the town. Darcy had thought the chief charming. Finally settling into her new home? A little too much, Brian said. She keeps digging through the place. Now she's discovered some trunk in the attic and got all excited about it. Oh, nice. What did she find in it? Brian sighed. That's the problem. She can't open it. It's locked, so her curiosity is raging, and she can't wait to see what's inside. Locked? Noah's smile weakened slightly. No key? I don't know if she tried looking around for one. She only called me a few minutes ago. Noah leaned back in his chair, his smile fading as he dropped into a deep contemplative stare. Brian studied him, wondering what the chief was thinking. Noah held up a finger before reaching down and opening one of the bottom drawers of his desk. He dug through it, trying to get to something at the bottom, his smile returning when he pulled out an old coffee mug out of the drawer and set it on the desk. Let me tell you an interesting story. Noah began to tell him about former police chief Pfefferkorn, now retired and living in Florida. He had run the quiet town for many years, but felt his career was tarnished by his inability to solve the Timmy Birch disappearance. Sure, the state police took charge of the case, as they did with major crimes in small towns, but it happened on his watch, and he was the one who had to look the townspeople in the eyes every day and feel like he failed them. Timmy Birch had been 4 years old when he went missing. One summer night he was snatched from his bedroom while he slept. His mother, asleep in the next room, didn't hear a sound. There were no clues as to what happened to him, no evidence, not a trace. About 16 years after the disappearance, and a few years before retiring, Chief Pfefferkorn had made a seemingly innocuous discovery. He had left the station around midnight and was walking along Main Street and some of the side streets around downtown when he happened upon something, a key. Pfeffercorn had kept it in his front shirt pocket, and for most of his last few years on the job he wondered about it. It had become obsessed with finding the lock it opened. He had told Noah how he had tried every lock he came upon, usually late at night while walking the streets, hoping he'd get lucky and find the lock the key fit, but it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Noah said the chief told him that he needed to find the lock it fit. Somehow he had gotten into his head that the key opened something important, that he had been destined to find it, that he couldn't retire until he found the lock. It had become a compulsion. The chief had told him he never stopped trying until the day he retired. Noah said he could see the sadness in the chief's eyes in the day of his retirement. Not sadness that he was leaving his position, but that he never found the lock the key went to. I think, Noah said to Brian, that his inability to solve the Birch case sent him over the edge with frustration, and that the key became some tangible object that he could resolve if only he found the lock it went to. Noah picked up the coffee mug. And when he retired, Noah said, he left this with me. Noah turned the coffee mug over and a key clattered onto the desktop. Brian looked at the small black key. It didn't look like the kind of key that would fit a door lock. It was old and looked more like it would open the lock of an antique roll-top desk, suitcase, maybe. And you think this key might go to the steamer trunk in my attic? I have no idea, but why not try it, Noah said, smiling. And the interesting thing was, Pfeffercorn told me where the key was found. It was near your house. Brian and Darcy Keyes lived on Ash Street, a U-shaped residential street off the main drag with both ends connecting to Main Street. It was dotted with Victorian and colonial houses, some of the oldest in town. Noah followed Brian home, and Darcy showed them where she had found the trunk. The three of them stood in the attic of the Keyes house. It was hot and stuffy, the air stagnant. Brian's sweat-drenched shirt clung to his back. The floorboards were covered in a layer of dust stirred up by the 3 sets of footprints. Darcy had pulled the trunk to the middle of the floor beneath one of the dim light bulbs. Brian wasn't happy she had done that, but she assured him it wasn't heavy. It didn't even feel like there's anything in there. Still, Brian said, frustrated she wasn't seeing his point, you need to be more careful. I will, was her curt answer. Noah stood by quietly till the couple finished, rubbing the key in his right hand. Brian looked at the smile on his face and thought the chief looked excited. It was the most animated he had ever seen the young chief. It made him actually look like a policeman. But what were the odds the key actually went to this trunk? Here goes nothing, Noah said, getting on his knees before the trunk. Brian and Darcy leaned over his shoulders. Noah slipped the key in, and with a bit of a struggle, he was trying to force it, Brian thought, to make it fit. But then there was a click, and Brian felt a well of amazement swell up in him as the lock popped open. Would you look at that, Noah said, looking back at them with a wide grin. He raised the lid of the trunk, standing in the process. The top of the lid shielded some of the light from the bulb overhead, shadowing the contents somewhat. So all Brian could see were yellowed newspapers wrapped around some objects. Noah reached in and grabbed one bundle, lifting it out with care. Very light, whatever it is, he said in a whisper, as if afraid to let anyone else hear. He set the parcel on the floor. I wonder what it could be, Darcy said, leaning closer. Brian said nothing, curious but not excited. What could they expect? Old pottery, maybe? The chief lifted some of the newspaper, which cracked and tore in his fingers. It was like peeling the layers of an onion. He tried to be gentle in case there was something breakable underneath. The 3 sets of eyes gazed down as page after page of old newspapers revealed shoe store ads, high school baseball game results, obituaries, and comic strips. Brian peered closer as Noah folded back the last layer. And I won't tell you what it reveals. That's what you have to buy the book for. I'm going to jump ahead in the story. This is later on in this. Brian tries to have a meeting with the woman who owned the house before him, that he had bought the house off. She's kind of gone into hiding since the trunk has been in the news. So he gets a mysterious call from her and arranges a secret rendezvous, and that was the title of this chapter, Secret Rendezvous. And he's going to meet her at an old abandoned train station on the outside of town. As the sun set behind the water tower, dusk enveloped Smoky Hollow. Brian sat in his car in the lot at the old shoe factory across from the abandoned train station. He had arrived just before sunset, wanting to get there before Ruth Snethan, but not wanting to park at the depot. He was trying not to attract attention to himself and thought the parking lot at the deserted factory would be better. A low brick wall with iron fencing along its top separated the parking lot from the road. Parked behind the wall, his car wouldn't be immediately visible to passers-by. His view over the top of the wall was enough that he should see anyone approach the train station. He chewed an antacid tablet, washing the gritty remnants down with hot coffee from his thermos. His stomach churned and his palms sweated. He lit up a cigarette and cranked the window down all the way. The setting sun did nothing to drag away the heat from the summer day. He drew on the cigarette and blew the smoke out the window. He watched the building across the street, wondering when the retired nurse would show up. He had so many questions swirling in his brain, and he was excited to get some answers. But he was afraid she would back out. He wished she would have let him meet with her when she called. She had too much time to change her mind. Brian wondered how Ruth would get to the station. Would she come by car? Walk? How was she getting around these days? The police hadn't been able to find her. Where was she hiding? A thought occurred to him. Maybe she was already here. She could have been hiding in the station all along, and that's why the authorities hadn't been able to locate her. That could be why she picked this spot. But she had called him from somewhere. Surely there was no electricity or phone service at the depot. If she was there already, she might not wait long for him. Brian grabbed his flashlight from his glove compartment and got out of his car, closing the door gently. He dropped his half-smoked cigarette to the ground and crunched it out underneath his shoe, wiping his sweaty palms on his shirt. There was a clunking sound behind him, and he whirled around, his heart leaping. The dark hulk of the shoe factory loomed over him, 4 stories high, with rows of tall windows lining each floor. None were boarded up, but only jigsaw pieces of glass remained in most. A tall smokestack at the right rose higher than the building. Some bricks at the top were missing, giving the smokestack a turret-like appearance. Brian turned on his flashlight and shined it along the dark windows of the upper floor. Maybe this was where Ruth was hiding. There was a flapping sound, probably a bird or bat. He kept expecting the flashlight beam to catch a shadow beyond the empty windows, but he was glad it didn't. But still, before he turned to cross the street, he couldn't help but feel someone watching him from behind those windows. He kept the flashlight off while crossing the street, not wanting to draw unneeded attention, but also not realizing how dark it was out here. The fact that the night was cloudy, obscuring what moonlight there could have been, didn't help. A large bank of gray clouds hovered over the end of Main Street. The clouds didn't look dark enough to be thunderheads, which was too bad, because some rain would cool the summer heat. He stepped onto the wooden platform in front of the depot, its wooden planks creaking beneath his shoes. Brian stopped. If she were inside, she would know he had arrived. He turned on his flashlight, pointing the beam along the platform to its edge by the lonely tracks. Even by what little light the flashlight beam cast, he could see the brush growing up between rusty rails. Tracks to nowhere, he thought. Brian shifted the beam to the front door. One step at a time, each followed by a creak, he approached the door. Should I knock, he wondered. It wasn't like this was her home. Or maybe it was. Regardless, she was expecting him. He grabbed the wooden knob and pulled. The door was wedged shut, most likely swollen from the summer heat, and it took him a couple strenuous tugs before it lurched open, almost striking him in the face. A whoosh of stale air escaped the interior of the dark station, like some trapped spirit being released. "Hello," he called softly, as if afraid of waking somebody. Miss Snethan. Was she Miss, Ms., or Mrs.? He didn't know. He recalled she lived alone at the house he had bought from her. Anyone home? He thought it odd to phrase it that way. This wasn't anyone's home, just a dilapidated old structure from a bygone era. He stepped inside. Broken glass crunched beneath his shoe, and he stopped, just inside the doorway. The flashlight struggled to penetrate the interior, thick with dust that danced in the path of the beam. He probed the 4 corners. Nobody, though the floor showed disturbances in the dust that covered it. Somebody at least had been here. Brian's mouth was dry from tasting the dust in the air, and he licked his lips. He wanted to spit, but he thought it would be rude to do so. His nerves, which had tightened, relaxed a bit. He was alone. But he was also disappointed, thinking maybe Ruth Snethan had changed her mind and retreated back into hiding. He scanned the flashlight beam around. The light caught something. He was not alone. And that's as much as you're going to hear tonight. So, anyway, does anybody have any questions or anything like to ask? Oh. Yes. I'm. No, that you have to find out by buying the book.
What's your
Well, for this book, I actually, because I wanted to, there were many ideas behind this book. I talked about the original story that came out of Somersworth. I also, working for 18 years at Foster's Daily Democrat, we had a lot of strange stories, and I like the idea of a small town with strange events happening. And I was also a big fan of the show Twin Peaks back in the day, which is coming back after 25 years. But I like that whole idea of this really strange, quirky town, and a stranger comes into the town to solve this mystery, and it's just full of mysterious characters. So, so I wanted really different sounding names for my characters in this town. So I actually I started making notes of names that I saw at work, names that were odd, and I just jotted them down. And then as I was creating my characters, I picked names that just sort of seemed to fit that person for whatever reason. Anybody else?
So you knew about the case with the
Mm-hmm.
in the attic.
Yes.
Did you have to research? I mean, did you research beyond what you knew from memory?
I did, well, a few years ago, Foster's actually did it was like a 3-part Sunday series on it was like, I think, the 30th anniversary of the case. And so they had a lot of information there. And I did kind of read through that, and I didn't use a lot of it, but it was just good to kind of know a lot of the background. I actually have a former co-worker who is a filmmaker, and he's actually in the process of making a documentary about that case. And he's interviewed the original police chief, detectives involved, and trying to piece together some semblance of a story. It's a really interesting story, the true story, and we'll never know how it was resolved, because it just never was. Anybody else? Yeah. I have a new manuscript that's it's actually done. I'm still kind of going through it one last time. It's actually a supernatural tale. I don't want to say too much about it, but I just needs to. I'm kind of giving it one last read through, and then hoping it'll be fit for someone to look at. So, and then once I'm done that, I actually I have a 4th novel that I'm really ready to start writing. So probably in a couple of months I'll start writing my 4th one.
So you're all fiction?
Yes. Yes.
Nothing else in your plans?
Not at the moment. No. No. Yeah. No. Nothing. Yeah.
Going out of business?
No. All fiction.
How did you find writing this one different than the first, or maybe
Well.
how the third one, you know what I mean?
Well, I am.
Change the process go for one?
Well, that's interesting, because my first book was a long process. My first novel, which came out in 2011, I actually started writing in the 1980s. I actually started writing it on a manual typewriter. And then as I was continuing with the story, I actually moved on to one of those old Smith Corona word processors that had like 7 lines of screen that held 7 lines of text. And then I rewrote it again on a regular portable computer, and then I finished it on a laptop. So it went through almost every evolutionary stage of electronic typing devices. But I spent probably 2 decades writing that book. I would pick it up after, I would let it sit for like 4 or 5 years and pick it up again and say, I'm going to tackle it again. And I kept rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. And so I finally got it into the shape that someone was interested in publishing it. And this book, it was a whole different process. I wrote it in a year, and I was writing it every day, even on Christmas. But I was determined to write every day until I got it done, and I think I learned a lot through the years of writing the first book. So I thought it was maybe a little easier to write. It was, I think, a more complicated plot than the first book. I approached it I approached it like this giant jigsaw puzzle, and I had all these pieces, and every piece had to fit exactly right, or this wouldn't have come together. And it was hard, but it was fun. But once the pieces did start to fit and fall in place, and I saw that they were working, and some of the pieces I actually changed as I was going along. I said, oh wait a minute, this might work if I do this, and then other pieces started falling into place, and hopefully it made a good picture. I guess that'll be determined. So, anybody? Yes.
When you send your book to be edited,
Yes.
is that what you do?
Mm-hmm.
And they suggest changes. Did you ever have to fight to keep something in there that they wanted out? You pretty much agree with
The publisher has a good editor. As my fellow author, Doug Wynn here, he's with the same publishing company, and his book, Red Equinox, just came out 2 months ago. As he would attest, they have some good editors there. And so I pretty much listened to most of what the editor said. There was maybe a couple small things that I maybe didn't agree with and didn't change, but I think for the most part, they know their stuff. Anybody else? No? Okay.
You're happy to sign?
I'll be happy to sign books, and
Thank you.